This is a kit with 500 grams of ultraviolet curing clear resin. It's typically used for casting, making jewelry, things like that, although you can use it just as an adhesive. And it's a kit because it comes with a silicone pad, mixing cups, sticks, and a pair of gloves. So I was sent this kit to review for free. If you wanted to purchase it, it would cost you about $17. All right, so in addition to the resin, you get a very thin and relatively small pad, and it has a very glossy side and a little bit matter side, and I think you can pick whichever side you want. So you can work directly on this pad and the UV resin won't stick to it, it'll peel off after you cure it. You also have a little baggie with some accessories. So there's a couple of tongue depressor style stir sticks, a couple of plastic sticks with a circle or an oval at one end for stirring and mixing. And then they have these little cups, which are kind of nice actually, little pour cups where you could mix things into the resin, put in colors or mica powder, and then there's a little pour spout that you can pour it off under very controlled setup there. So those are kind of a nice little feature to add in there. And then of course it looks like 2 pairs of gloves here. So you're probably going to need more than 2 pairs of gloves if you're using the whole thing, unless you're making one big batch of something. So this resin says with a 36 watt UV lamp, it'll take 2 to 4 minutes to cure. So I just have a little flashlight that's not a 36 watt flashlight. So it's probably going to take a really long time to cure with a little flashlight, unless it's a very small amount. Now on a sunny day, it says 5 to 10 minutes in the sunlight. In a cloudy day, 20 to 40 minutes. So it looks like it's going to take a decent time under UV light to fully cure this. It's not just like in a flash cure on you. However, this is not something you want to work with outside. I think if you took it outside and started to work with it, it would be curing on you faster than you wanted to not have enough working time. All right, so in the box is this optically black container to protect it from UV light, and it just has their sticker, showing what it is on front of it, and it has a top here to take off. So let's go use this a little bit. And so first thing I want to just play with a little bit is this guy's talking about a 36 watt UV light or taking out in the sunlight for many minutes. So it could take a decent amount of UV exposure to harden this. I want to see if I have just a small drop. Can I harden it with just a battery operated flashlight? So this is a 365 nanometer flashlight. And I want to see basically, can I use this as an adhesive or a glue, just a small spot somewhere? I'm thinking I want to glue this guy to the base, put a couple of small spots down, and can I use it just with the flashlight, or am I going to have to go and get a seriously big 36 watt UV light or take it outside every time I want to harden something? All right, so it comes packaged with the foil. We'll need to cut that away first. Okay, so when I pierced the foil, there was a small chemical smell. It's not an outrageously large amount of chemical smell. Now we're going to try to get a little bitty bit out of the tip there. So there's a little dot. That's probably about the smallest amount I could get out of this in a single shot. And we're just going to hit this with the UV flashlight. So you can see it's not a super bright UV flashlight. It does look like it's UV reactive. It's kind of glowing a little bit when I hit it there. And so I have this thing pretty darn close to that guy. And I'm basically just seeing, can I solidify this dot in a reasonable working time, which is, about that is what I would call reasonable working time. And it is hard to the touch here. It's not sticking to the, my wooden depressor here. I'm going to push down pretty hard on it. I think it deformed just slightly there, so I'm not going to say it's completely cured, but you can definitely get it to at least the surface solidify. Now this may not work with a casting where it's, you know, inches thick, or, you know, a large amount of the resin. But if you're dealing with a small amount like I am here, it looks like it's very successfully cured with just a small handheld flashlight. It may not be fully cured, but, you know, it's pretty hard there. It'll hold two pieces together at least until you can take it outside and cure it for longer. All right, so this tiny little drop is very clear. I do have a bubble in it, but it is definitely very clear resin, and it's a very kind of gloss, shiny, reflective appearance on the outside. All right, so my next experiment is I want a gloss finish on these growths while leaving the bricks essentially the matte finish they have. So I have here a sacrificial paintbrush. It's an inexpensive paintbrush. I'm just going to sacrifice to the resin. So with this sacrificial paintbrush, I am going to attempt to put resin only on top of the areas I want to look glossy. And then we're going to solidify that when I'm happy with it. And I do want to point out this is a sacrificial paintbrush. I am not expecting to be able to paint with this paintbrush after this application, so you'll definitely want to have some inexpensive paintbrushes if you're going to be using this with resin. I should also point out I've made a tactical error here in that the glove should be on the hand holding the piece and not the hand holding the paintbrush. But luckily, because this is a UV cured resin, supposedly I should have essentially infinite working time so that I can change gloves out, move things around, and not have to worry about this hardening on me until I'm ready for it to do so and hit it with UV light. And because it's clear, it's not the end of the world if I get a little bit on the bricks below here. I mean, it would be just like a little bit of slime coming off onto the bricks. So I'm not having to be too careful about putting this out. It's not super thin and runny. It's not super thick. It's, you know, nowhere near as viscous as honey. You can spread it pretty easily, and it will run a little bit. But on flat surfaces like this, I'm not too worried about it, you know, sliding around and moving around too much. Now, I also want to use this to glue my figure on top of this guy, but I'm going to do this in two steps. So my plan is to take this piece outside, cure it in the sun, so that the stuff I have here won't be exposed to UV light. Also, I'm just practicing sun curing this stuff to see kind of how it works out. And I'm being kind of heavy with it around these like egg things because I want them to look like they're covered with slime, glossy. So let's take this outside and see how that reacts to sunlight. All right, I walked outside. I have here basically direct sunlight. So they were talking about 10, 20, 30 minutes in sunlight if you're doing like a casting. But this is very thin, I'd say the layer is less than a millimeter thick. So I'm expecting it, especially given that my little flashlight had cured this in, just less than a minute. I'm expecting this full sunlight to have no problem curing this in, the 30 seconds I've been out here. It looks very glossy still, so it's hard to tell if it's been cured without touching it. I want to err on the side of caution since it's the first time I've done this, because I don't want to leave like glove prints or fingerprints in it, but if I had to guess, I would suspect it's probably cured by now. Seeing as how my flashlight cured it, let's touch this thing and see. Just as a note, I have overhead lights all over the place while I'm doing the filming here. A lot of LED lights, a window to the outside. The window does have double pane and it's e-glass, so I know it blocks UV light. And so it's, I haven't had a problem yet with this stuff solidifying even with all these artificial lights around. So I felt a little bit of tack there, so it was still tacky, sticking to my glove just a little bit there. Alright, this guy's been out here for 5 minutes. It kind of still feels tacky, although that might just be the gloss coat. It's hard for me to tell if this is actually tacky or it's just that it's so smooth it's kind of sticking with surface tension to my glove. It doesn't feel super tacky. I don't appear to be leaving marks in it or anything's coming off on the glove. So I think it's at least set up enough for me to move on to my second stage here. So the second stage we'll be trying to use it as adhesive to glue this guy down to it. And I only have a limited number of small contact points. I basically have these 2 rear feet in the tail. And so I just need to figure out exactly where I want to put things. And it overhangs a little bit regardless of how I do it. So I'm going to have to decide exactly where I want to put stuff. And I haven't yet decided if I want to put glue on the legs and then stick them down, or put glue on the locations where I think they're going to be, or how I want to hold it in place while it's setting up. So I really like this 3D model, but I think the base is just slightly too small for it, even though it came with the model. It's very wiggly. I have tiny little contact points, so adhesion would be difficult here. So we're going to see how well this will work. I need to basically get this stuff in between these points here, and then it's going to be moving around a bit. And I also have some, or just a few points where the tail is touching. And so I'm having to hold this together here with one hand. I'm just going to be using my flashlight, so this resin here is going to go away. But we are going to be curing these contact points and hoping that I have enough resin in there that this is going to hold it in place. And some of the issue is this resin is UV curing resin, so the light has to get into the resin. And so if it's being shielded by the model and the base, it's hard to get the light in to cure it. And so you're basically counting on the light kind of bouncing around in between the two parts at these edges where it goes in. And so this could take longer to cure than just resin just sitting out on the counter there. And so I'm coming in from different directions and lighting a few things up. Noticing some of my paint actually fluoresces. Some of my red paint is UV fluorescent, which was not intended, but is a side effect. It's a beneficial side effect. And so I'm afraid to let go of this thing too early because I don't really have a strong feel for just how strong this resin is. It's a casting resin. It's not specifically designed for sticking parts together. However, usually UV resin will stick things together pretty well. Okay, so here's the moment of truth. We're going to see, does this thing fall apart when I let go of it? It doesn't, so it's at least holding its own weight, and that's enough for me to hold the flashlight a little longer, take it outside, leave it out in the sun, or I can put it in my 3D printing curing station and rotate it around in the curing station for a while to make sure this stuff's fully cured. Now if we look at the resin on the paintbrush, which was my sacrificial paintbrush, and the resin down here, this stuff appears to be mostly cured. The paintbrush I'm still able to bend, so maybe it's not fully resinated, and I'm putting resin, wet resin on top of this blob of resin with the paintbrush there. But that stuff is at least solidified a bit, so I think I'm definitely going to put this out in the sun to cure longer. But just hitting it with a flashlight for a minute or so definitely got it to the point where it's self-supporting and holding things up. I don't know if it's fully cured or not. Now, a lot of people, when they're looking to buy UV resin, it's not for enhancing gloss or sticking small parts together, it's for casting things. And so I'm going to do a cast, and this is a very thin one. It's just a coaster, and I'm going to basically do multi-layers here. And so my idea is that I will paint each layer separately, so having this be UV resin such that I can put a thin layer down, paint a layer, put another layer on top, paint another layer, get kind of a 3D appearance in the painting. The UV resin lets me do that a lot faster than if it was an epoxy resin, so that I can cure it kind of between paint sessions. Otherwise, you'd have to wait for your resin to set up. And so it's not flowing as much as I would like you can definitely flow it around, but you have to, tilt it and use gravity. So it's not a water, viscous. It's less viscous than honey, but it's somewhere between kind of honey and a thick oil. So to fill this thing entirely, I'm having to kind of slide around and make gravity move it around a bit and fill in these holes. And I'm hoping it's not going to get too many bubbles and so forth. So I have one more down here. And I could be using the pushing sticks to kind of push things around. I have this paintbrush which is already sacrificed, so I could push things around a bit instead of using gravity there. I see some things that look kind of like bubbles. I'm going to poke some things. Some of those were maybe dust specks instead of bubbles. Okay, so we have a layer down, and now before I paint on that I want to cure it. So this is where you get your 36 watt UV light down here to cure this thing. I don't have one of those, so that's where you take it outside in the sun, but I don't want to do that because it's not on a flat base, and so it's hard to carry around. So we're going to try curing this with my little flashlight. And I don't need it to be completely cured. I just need to be cured enough that I can paint on it. As I'm lighting it up with the flashlight, I'm seeing some bubbles here. Like there's a bubble. And I'm trying to poke some of these bubbles. So if you had a vacuum degassing chamber, I certainly would help. This feels liquidy still, but it seems to be getting more solid. Yeah, so it's definitely filmed over. So the top at least is filmed over. It's definitely not solidified entirely, but the top is definitely filmed over. So I'm going to do this for a couple of minutes, and then I'll try painting on a level. Now, if I was serious about this, I'd probably go buy a 36 watt UV light, or put this on a flat tray so that I could easily carry it outside to solidify it. Okay, it feels relatively hard, at least on the surface, so I'm going to try giving it painting a shot. Alright, we're starting from the top down, so this is going to be just a blobby center point of a flower. Okay, time for more resin. We're going to cover this larger flower area. All the way out to the tips. Trying to make sure there's no holes. Make sure the paint doesn't poke out anywhere. Then we're going to lock that down with more UV light. Actually, I'm going to tilt it this way a little bit because I want it to flow that way a little bit. And I have some paint pigments in the resin. You can see some of the paint pigments are floating in the resin. Just probably okay for this type of painting. I don't know. I've never done it before. But let's lock this down and do another layer on top with a different color, more reddish color petals. And you can really see this bubble that popped up here. And maybe I'm imagining it, but it feels like this thing isn't flat anymore, like the resin curing in the center is pulling it up into a dome shape, which is bad for a coaster because coasters are supposed to be flat. But let's just fill it up the rest of the way. I'm going to put it on a tray so that I can take it outside for the final cure. Okay, we are going to fill the rest of this caster mold up. So I'm just going to start at the center and work out. I definitely have a bubble right there. Those of you who do resin casting for a living, I'm probably doing everything wrong, I'm sure. But we're really just evaluating the material more than my process, right? Okay, we're taking this outside. All right, I left this guy out in the sun for 20 minutes. I went out and tapped it. It felt perfectly hard and done. I left it out another 20 minutes just to be safe, so it's demolding just fine. No problems at all with sticking to the silicone. I didn't have any mold release agent or anything on it, just silicone. And so here's the result. Now, I am not a professional resin painter, so don't judge me by the painting, but it can see the resin here is very clear. I have a few little bubbles stuck here and there, which is more my technique than the resin, I think. But everywhere else is nice and clear, and I can definitely see there's a couple of different layers in there. I didn't get as much of a 3D effect as I would like. The whole thing is only, 1/4 inch thick, so it's not a super deep casting. That's more of a, a wide, narrow casting. It's relatively flat. Let's see. So it does look like the edges pulled up and bowed up just slightly, and that might be because I was doing multiple layers and concentrating more resin in the center, so I've been pulling the edges up a little bit when I did that. But all in all, it's a very clear casting result, nice and hard after just 40 minutes in the sun. So I'm pretty happy with this as UV curing resin.